Hi, this is Michael Swinford. Welcome to this edition of the Veteran Voice. Today we're going to be listening to a panel of veterans from World War I all the way through Desert Storm and Desert Shield. They will present a very special program today in describing their military service and what Veterans Day really means to them. So sit back, stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to help us celebrate this Veterans Day. My day job here at the college, I'm Dr. Garrett, Professor of History, but in my other life, Command Sergeant Major Garrett, United States Army with over 30 years service. We have a distinguished panel of veterans here from World War II through Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm going to talk a little bit about their time in service and reminisce a bit. Also, we'll entertain any questions you may have of any of them about any topic. They, of course, reserve the right to answer what they want. But all war stories are true. Keep that in mind. Before we start with the rest of the program, will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. As you may know, on the 19th of February, Marcus Luttrell, who wrote a book, Lone Survivor, he's a Navy SEAL who will be on campus, and his book, we have his book available up here, and if you care to buy a copy today and come back on the 19th when he's here, he'll be glad to autograph it for you. The United States has a long and distinguished military tradition. We are fortunate to have veterans from World War II down through the good corporal who's just returned from Iraq. In every war ever fought, American soldiers have demonstrated the qualities, not only the fighting qualities, but the human qualities that often set us apart from many other nations in their treatment not only of prisoners, but especially of children and non-combatants. World War II was the largest war in the history of the world, not only through 1945, but since 1945. The Cold War began at the end of World War II, where the communist bloc, led by the Soviet Union, and the democracies, led principally by the United States, confronted each other. Although the Cold War didn't develop into World War III, in some cases that's little short of miraculous. Once upon a time, in one of my other military activities, I was looking at a Soviet targeting list. It showed in the event of nuclear war, it showed which missiles and what missile silos they were in and what targets were in the United States. Paducah, Kentucky was a fifth priority target because of the Union Carbide plant. Now, fifth priority doesn't mean the fifth missile. Fifth priority is anything to do with nuclear weapons production. And they don't make, or did not make, weapons-grade nuclear material here, but they began the enrichment process. The flight time from a Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile field in the southeastern Ukraine from launch to detonation over Paducah, Kentucky was about 24 minutes. The fact we did not have World War III, again, in many cases, is a little short of miraculous. But the fact there was not a Third World War that, as Churchill said, the next Stone Age may come on the silvery wings of science. The fact there was not a World War III didn't take away from the fact there were some very hot spots in this international Cold War. Korea was one, Vietnam was one. We have some veterans from those wars as well. Well, this is not a history lecture, so there won't be a quiz after I finish talking. But without further ado, I ask each of the veterans to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what their service was. Sir?
Joe Pittard. I was in the Europe theater in World War II. It was the 83rd Infantry Division. I was trained at Atterbury and then Tennessee Maneuvers and then overseas, and I was lucky enough to go into Omaha Beach, not on D-Day, but the next wave. They hadn't picked the beach up. It was still covered with humans, parts of humans, but it was an eye-opener for me. I was just out of high school, wasn't very old for that kind of stuff, but anyhow, I was wounded the first time on the 4th of July. At that time, I'd never seen that much fireworks, but I saw it later, but that was the most fireworks I'd ever seen on the 4th of July. And we didn't have much real estate. You could still throw a rock and hit the English Channel, so they shipped us back to England to the hospital. I came back from the hospital and joined my outfit in Luxembourg. And from there to Hurtgen Forest. And we finished up in the Hurtgen Forest on Christmas Eve, 1944, and we was going to go back to Aachen and get a shower and have Christmas dinner and open our mail. We got back because Aachen was it was devastated, just a bunch of bombed out buildings. But about 10 o'clock, the company commander asked me if I'd had my shower, and I said, no, we're waiting for the water to get hot. He said, well, get a shower if you can, but don't shave, because we're moving out. We moved out that afternoon. We ate the turkey about 12:30 and never got our mail, and we went to the Burrage. And then I got wounded the second time in the Burrage, which wasn't too much, but after the Burrage, my outfit went to Holland and regrouped, got recruits and built up and made a bridgehead across the Elbe River. We were the only outfit in World War II that crossed the Elbe River. They stopped us about 10 or 15 miles out of Berlin because all the German soldiers were trying to give up to the Americans. They was afraid of the Russians. They were all coming in waves, and the Russians were getting angry because we were getting all the prisoners, and we didn't want them anyhow. But anyhow, they said to stop taking prisoners, to shoot over their head, and anyhow, that's where we were at the end of the war. And then we found out later that Eisenhower had given orders to no one cross the Elbe River. So we were we were supposed to get another combat star for that, which we probably won't. But anyhow, I don't think it's going to insult the commanding general. So the people that died and was wounded across the Elbe River was for nothing. But anyhow, that was the end of my career in the Army.
Sir?
My name is Earl Gidcumb. I'm from Wycliffe, Kentucky, born in Harrisburg, Illinois. Before I get started, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce a lady that's done more for the veterans and the World War II veterans and the Vietnam veterans and any other veterans that we know in this area. She's done more for them than anybody that I have ever known in my entire life, and it's my pleasure. I'm not going to ask her to say anything because we don't have enough time. But anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Sandy Hart. I served 2 years, 8 months, and 9 days in the United States Navy. I graduated from my high school on May the 23rd, 1943, and then 2 days later I was in the Great Lakes Naval Training Station, training to be a sailor. While I was at Great Lakes, I taught swimming. I never did do any training, I just taught swimming, so I wasn't really prepared to fight a war. They sent me to San Diego, California to a receiving station, and I stayed out there a few days, and then I was sent to New Orleans, back across the country to New Orleans, where I picked up a ship, the USS LST 218, which is a flat-bottom boat that they used for beach landings. And we went down through the Panama Canal and wound up in Hawaii. at Pearl Harbor. I spent 38 days on that tub, and very sick days, as a matter of fact. And on October the 31st, 1943, I boarded the USS Indianapolis. At that time, Captain Johnson was the captain, and we carried an Admiral Raymond Spruance, who was charged of the Fifth Fleet. While the Fifth Fleet was out doing its thing in the ocean, taking islands and what have you, Halsey was in his place in Pearl Harbor planning for the next invasion. On September the 2nd, 1944, I was transferred, and later on I boarded the USS Bottineau, APA 235, which was a troop-carrying ship. And we carried troops to Japan, occupational troops. And I was transferred off of that on January 26, 1946, and was discharged on February the 3rd, 1946. While aboard the Indianapolis, the ship had a total of 10 battle stars. I earned 5 while I was on it, and I earned 1 while I was aboard the Bottineau. I think Tammy had asked me to mention some stories. I think that there's a couple of things that are very vivid in my mind. We were in the what they call the Mariana Turkey Shoot, which was in the late Philippine Sea. And at that time, we were completely surrounded by ships because we were the flagship and we were right in the middle of the fleet directing the progress of the battle. And at that particular day, we shot down 435 Japanese planes, not counting the carriers and destroyers that we, a battleship that we destroyed. So it was one heck of a battle. And I think the other thing that I remember vividly is I worked on a 5-inch 25 gun during the battle at a battle station, and I was given the job of handing the shell out of the magazine to the guy that loaded it into the breech of the gun. It took 2 of us to do this. And I looked up between picking the shells off the conveyor belt. I looked up and there was a big, huge orange airplane coming past me, and it was a Japanese airplane that was going over the top of us, and I was too dumb to be scared, I guess. And finally, I feel that I have 2 vivid memories. When I was transferred off the Indianapolis in September 2nd, 1944, the following July of 30th of 1945, the ship was sunk. It was the Navy's worst naval disaster. There was absolutely no reason for it to be sunk, but that's a long story. There was 1,196 aboard the ship, 317 survived, and as of today, there's 67 of the survivors still living. I talked to one of them this morning. In February 22nd, 1949, I was discharged. I joined the National Guard and was discharged from the National Guard up in Illinois, July the 1st, 1950. Had I stayed in the National Guard, I would have wound up in Korea, because right after I got out of it, they activated that and sent it to Korea. Had I stayed on the Indianapolis, I would not be sitting here talking to you today, because the second torpedo of the 2 that sunk the Indianapolis would have been right in the bed with me, because it went right in where I slept. I feel like that I have to give credit to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for my survival. I just marvel at the fact that He's let me live this long, and I've lived to be 84 years old with good health, and what more could a man ask for?
I'm Syl Mayolo. I'm from Wickliffe, Kentucky. I'd like to digress a moment and just bring to everybody's attention the 13 comrades that was lost and the 29 that were wounded at Fort Hood. I think we shall just take a moment and say a little silent prayer. Thank you. To the two gentlemen on my left, I say thank you, the greatest generation ever lived. As Sandy and Earl know, I get kind of emotional when I talk at these things, and this is why I don't like to do it. I enlisted with 4 cousins in the Navy, and it was either go to college, get a deferment, or go in the service. But my grandfather, who had immigrated from Italy, used to tell me things about the old country and about this country, and that his heirs owed a debt of gratitude, which I believe strongly. Excuse me. My father was in the First World War, my brother in the Second World War, and it was my duty to serve. Boot camp was quite a cultural shock to me because all the fellows in my company were from the inner cities along the East Coast, Baltimore, Washington, New York, Newark. And if there was a flag to be given for a fouled up company, we would have won it, because those guys couldn't fall off of a rock without fouling it up. And this is one thing in my mind that still sticks today, and it really burns me up. We never won a flag in 13 weeks of training, and we were the senior company in the brigade. I had the privilege of serving with a lot of World War II fellows that were staying in the service or else got called back in, like Earl would have got called back in during the Korean War. And I also had the privilege of working with some civilians while stationed in Washington, D.C. I put in a number of requests to get transferred. They cut orders for me to go aboard aircraft carrier, and they canceled that. They cut orders for me to go to Korea again, and they canceled that. The first aircraft carrier that I was supposed to go on, it was hit by something. I can't remember what it was, but it was right in the area where the supply division was. So whether I'd have been there or not, I don't know. But like Earl, the good Lord was looking after me. Well, I ended up in Bremerhaven, Germany. So I didn't serve in Korea, and I'm a poor example of a Korean veteran as far as I'm concerned. I worked in purchasing, and I had a fella that I ordered a lot of equipment for. And many, many years later, Westvaco decided to make a film on a cycle of growth, which is a paper-making process. And this fella that I ordered a lot of equipment for was a reservist, had been in the Second World War and got called back in. And lo and behold, the company that got the job to film the paper-making process was the owner of this, and was this fella. And I got talking to him in the lab one night. We got talking about Anacostia, and then we found out that we'd actually talked on the phone. And later on, I found out that he normally didn't go out on the jobs, but he was there, and he was a perfectionist. But he had cancer. He was dying. And I think it's indicative of his training. I flew with a number of pilots. They were all Second World War aircraft carrier pilots. And I used to just fly for the fun of it, and I used to get to sit up in the co-pilot seat. One night we were coming in over South Capitol Street Bridge, and we were so low, if you were duck hunting or goose hunting, you'd been able to take a shot at it. Our wheels were out and everything, and I was sitting there, and all at once I looked over at the starboard engine, and it just stopped. That's a funny feeling. And all at once, he just flicked a few things, just kept on going in. We landed perfect. But that was the training these fellas here had. And you can't say too much about them. While in Germany, I like to take the flip side. a story that's really stuck in my mind. It was a lady that was the head of the cleaning ladies in the storeroom, and we used to catch a 24-hour duty down there, and it was an apartment. And we used to take food down there, and I always used to get this older lady that was in charge to do the cooking for us. And then we all sat down at a table and ate. And she kind of told me the story about her family. She was a widow lady. She married and had a husband and 3 children. He was a machinist. The oldest boy got drafted. He came home once on leave, was out in France, probably during the invasion. Never heard any more about him. The second son was put in a Nazi youth group, and she said after he came back from that, he wasn't recognizable. Didn't have anything to do with his family. Never heard another word from him. One night late, the youngest son and the father were taken in to serve and sent to the Russian front. She never heard any more of them. So war isn't a pleasant thing for anybody. But my heart went out to that lady. Now, the November issue of the Legion magazine, there's an article in there, How the Military Changed My Life, the November issue. I think it's something everybody should read. It gave me a sense of direction. Discipline, a different kind of discipline, not one that I'm getting chastised for, but a discipline in things that you do. Toughness, not one you go out and beat somebody up in the street, but a toughness of when you have something to do. You stick with it. Duty, teamwork, accepting responsibility. 18 is a responsibility I was given. I've been years before I would have been able to have that. Exposure to different cultures and accomplishments, and a bonding that you don't realize so much when you're there till after you get out. And the Naval Advanced Base in Bremerhaven, Germany, the Weser River Patrol and the Rhine River Patrol, we have a reunion. And when you walk in that room, it's something that's tangible, but yet it's intangible. It's a feeling. It's something that grabs you. That when the veterans get together, it's no explaining it. And I don't mean the war stories, but just that bonding. Regret? Yes. I'm too old to serve. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kent Curtsinger. I am from Fancy Farm, Kentucky, and I'm a veteran of the United States Army. I served for 31 years, 9 months, and 22 days, not that I was counting. I want to thank everybody who helped put this on today, Tammy and Dr. Garrett. Appreciate y'all's efforts on this. This panel is a great thing. I appreciate all of you for being here today. I appreciate you taking time for remembering the men and women that have served and for those still serving. It means a lot to me and all of us. You know, I always wondered what civilians did for Veterans Day, because I was on active duty and I knew what we did. Number one, we got a day off. And we also usually had some ceremonies to attend. But when I retired, I wondered what do civilians do? And I see you guys doing this, and I appreciate that. I've always considered myself as one of the lucky ones. I always wanted to be a soldier. I attribute that to the gentleman on my left here. You're right. My father was a World War II and Korean War veteran. His brother was World War II in Korea. I had 4 uncles on my mother's side who all served in World War II, all in the Army with the exception of one. He was a Marine. The family eventually forgave him. No disrespect. But I listened to them all my life growing up, and just as soon as I could graduate from Fancy Farm High School, I joined the Army and took off to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I met a bunch of guys that didn't seem real happy that I had joined the Army at all. But I went through the training, and I stayed in the Army. I was enlisted for 8 years. I went to Murray State University, ROTC, and got my commission, and finished out my time in the Army as an officer and retired as a lieutenant colonel. I'm representing, I guess, the first Gulf War. I think it's what it'll eventually be called, Desert Shield, Desert Storm. But in those 16 years that I had from when I joined, and I was considered a Vietnam-era vet, never served in Vietnam, but let me tell you, I was trained by those guys. And those guys were trained by these guys right over here. And they trained us hard and trained us to be ready for whatever happened to come up. During those 16 years, I went through the alert, assemble, deploy routine more times than I can count. I trained in places that were really, really unpleasant, like the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. That's where Patton trained up his herd to go to World War II. Joint Readiness Training Centers at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, over in Europe. I deployed twice to a thing called Reforger, where we took entire Army divisions and shipped them to Europe. So we were well trained and well prepared by our other generations for the war that I eventually participated in that, like I said, I think will be called the First Gulf War. I was in the 101st Airborne Division as a captain. I was the Assistant Operations Officer of an Air Defense Artillery Battalion assigned to the 101st. So I was a Screaming Eagle during that time. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, I believe it was, I'm really amazed that my memory of dates has gotten so bad in this short period of time, but I think it was around the 5th of August. And we were immediately put on alert. We knew we were probably going to be going over. The 101st is a very light division, meaning it's easy to move personnel and materials quickly. And it was. By the 20th of August, I was sitting in a place called Camp Eagle, would eventually be called Camp Eagle 2. It was on an old not an old airfield, but an airfield that the Saudis had never felt compelled to complete, but we could land stuff on it. We went through a process there where we massed forces, something that you do. You build combat power. I always said if Saddam Hussein had really had his act together there, he'd have charged through the Saudis immediately, because they weren't going to fight very hard, no offense to any of them. But we sat there and we built combat power. We brought forces over, and I was there for the entire buildup. We also did what was called the covering force action, where we went right on the border of Kuwait, and we tried to make ourselves look bigger than we really were by moving a whole lot. During that time period, we were fully armed, ready to go, waiting for the war to start. I think I realized that I'd been in the Army 16 years, felt like I was pretty experienced. And I don't think the intensity of this war was going to kick into me until the day as the operations officer I fell back to what we call the core level MO storage point, ASP, to pick up a basic load of ammo. When you go into war, you want all the ammo you can carry, and then you want a little bit more. We had our basic load of ammo, but we needed to have a backup for it because the shooting war was getting ready to start. And when we pulled into the core ASP with our trucks, and I was getting the paperwork straight, because you can't run a military without paperwork, I looked around, and the ASP was larger than the campus of PCC, and there was ammo stacked as high as I could see. And I thought, I think they're serious about this war. I think we're really going to do something here. And we did. We continued to build power, and we moved out right after Christmas '90. That's when we started moving out. And we went right up to the Iraqi border to stage and start the air war. And what I remember first about it, I led what they called the ADVON, the advanced party. I had myself, my operations NCO, and a lot of communications equipment, and as much ammo as I could possibly fit in the back of a Humvee. We moved up to the Iraqi border, and I thought we were going to stay on the safe side of it. And when I looked at the map and did my little calculation, I realized I was already in Iraq, and the shooting hadn't even started. Now, those maps are a little bit funny. And everybody familiar with global positioning systems? Okay, we didn't have those. I got lost the old-fashioned way. I had a map and a compass, okay? And we waited at that point for the air war to start. And once it started, we stayed in place and continued our probing. And one of the 101st main missions were to strip out the Iraqi early warning by launching helicopters and ground forces to knock out radar sites. So we went through that. When the air war started, I took our battalion's tactical operations center. That was part of my responsibility. That's where we tracked the battle. And we did an air assault. Air assault means you ride in helicopters, and that's really neat because they sling all your equipment underneath, you ride in, and they drop you in places where you're really not supposed to be. I went halfway through Iraq to a place called Cobra, and we set up, and then within about 24 hours, I went to the Euphrates River, where we cut off the retreat of the Republican Guard. While I was there, I don't know how many of you were watching TV at that time. We didn't have TV up there, but I guess the photos that came back from the highway to hell was being publicized, and they decided to call the war off because we had defeated the Republican Guard as far as they were concerned. That was great. The war had ended, but they didn't tell all the Iraqis that. I would stay in the middle of that country between a forward operating base called Viper and Cobra, continuing to clean out bunkers and guys that didn't know they were supposed to have surrendered for about another month or so. Once that was over, we fell back into Camp Eagle 2. I would eventually end up serving over there for about a little over 9 months. And then we went back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Now, I was going to stay in the Army. I was thinking when I got back to Fort Campbell that I would get a break. and I did. I took command of a battery, and I took off to the Joint Readiness Training Center 3 months after I got back. I didn't even have all of my equipment yet. At November, I came back in September from the Joint Readiness Training Center. In November, I went to the National Training Center. We never stopped training. If it's one thing that the military has learned, is you can't stop training no matter what. Even when we were in Iraq, we trained for the combat missions. After that war was over, I stayed in the Army. I did a number of assignments and ended up going back on what we will probably call the interim period 2 more times, once to Kuwait during an operation called Intrinsic Action, and I did a 13-month tour in Saudi Arabia as a remote advisory detachment commander working with the Saudi Army. I got to travel all over the country, to include Iraq and a little bit of other countries. And still, to me, it was kind of like we were continuing our presence there for what we're doing now and what the corporal's going through right now. You know, I always consider myself very lucky. I knew what I wanted to do as a young man. I got to do it. I served in the Army until I physically was no longer able to do that. I can enjoy my retirement, and I can enjoy my freedom. And I never had any doubts about what I was doing. Since my retirement, I still work for the Army. I'm a defense contractor, and I work for a company called Northrop Grumman, and I support the Battle Command Training Program. And for the last 4 years, I've helped train soldiers that are going back over to mainly Iraq and some to Afghanistan. I just got back Friday from Fort Riley, Kansas. I really enjoy what I'm doing on that because I feel like I get to do what these guys did. They trained me for what I needed to do, and I hope I can continue to share that. Once again, I appreciate all you being here today because it really means a lot. Thank you.
Still getting the job done, aren't you?
Cool.
I only use these because I can't see. My name is Sam Burrage, and I want to thank all of you for coming out here today and showing your appreciation for these fine men who have done so much to provide the freedoms that we all enjoy in this country. From the greatest generation to the latest generation. These men are just ordinary men called upon to do extraordinary things, and they've done it well. My time came in Vietnam. I was a young man when I went to Vietnam. I was lucky when I was in Vietnam. I was able to come back with my health and strength. Not all Vietnam veterans are mangled or came back with post-traumatic stress disorder. Many of them did, many of them didn't. It's that way. I mean, you go and sometimes you come back, you're pretty whole. You have memories that you'll never forget. And many of them come back and they're very close to being a basket case. And I know some who are that way. Not their fault. It's the price we pay for this thing we called war. It's an ugly, dirty business. But it's a necessary business. And in Vietnam, it was a dirty little war. I got over there in February, it was January, late January of 1968. And the first night in country was the worst night of my life. I landed at a huge, monstrous air base called Da Nang. And my first night in country was one hellacious rocket attack. I knew then that I had to go somewhere. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I felt like I needed to, at the first opportunity, go somewhere. And I did. I got, there were some orders that came down, and there was a place called Quinh Nhan. I had never heard of Quinh Nhan, didn't know where it was, and I took it. May have been making the worst mistake of my life, but as it turned out, it was one of the best decisions I made. Quinh Nhan was relatively safe. One of the reasons why is because it was on the South China Sea. There was only one way to attack the place, and that was inland. We were protected by the sea on one side of the town. And another reason why it was safe is because there was a huge deployment of Republic of Korean soldiers, ROK soldiers, R-O-K, Republic of Korean. and their kill ratio was something like 19 or 20 to 1. In other words, they were the fiercest fighters you ever want to encounter on a battlefield. And the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese knew this, so they would do everything they could to avoid having a confrontation with the Korean soldiers. Well, they were right there with us. So, you know, that was a comforting feeling. Yes, we did have some attacks. I could see firefights going on at night. I could look out my barracks and just know that something was happening terrible to our guys. You know, I could see tracers going through the sky, hear explosions going off. That was a regular thing. I mean, you got used to it. Did we lose Vietnam? A lot of people believe that we did. I happen to differ. We just left. We left. It was America's longest war, lasting over 10 years, but we just left. The Vietnam, you know, the Paris Peace Accords dictated that the American soldiers would withdraw, that all POWs would be released. There were certain conditions, and both sides accepted it. There was nothing in there about defeat or anything. It was a stalemate, is what it was. And I hope that we have learned some lessons from that stalemate. That's the thing that I hope America takes from Vietnam. I sometimes wonder whether or not we have. You look at 1 out of every 3 homeless people in this country now, and 1 out of every 3 is a Vietnam veteran. 1 out of every 3 homeless persons is a Vietnam vet, and that is just unconscionable. There's something wrong that needs to be righted about that. 9 out of every 10 Vietnam veterans say they are not sorry that they served. 9 out of every 10. 7 out of every 10 say that they would do it again. Even knowing the outcome of the war, they would do it again. I happen to be one of those. I would do it again if called upon. I would do it again because of you. I would do it again because of the American people. You know, it's not the American military. It's America that Al-Qaeda and all these terrorists have declared war on. They don't want to fight the American military. They want to scare the American people. It's a fear campaign, you know, like 9/11 that happened in New York. They don't want to fight the military. They don't want to have anything to do with these guys. They know they wouldn't stand a chance, but they want to affect the American people. And that is something that we must not allow to happen. And that's why I'd be one of the 7 out of 10 Vietnam vets who'd raise the hand again and say, I'll do it again. Thank you all for coming.
Excuse me. My name is James Ouderkirk. I'd like to start off by explaining why this is the greatest generation that's sitting here to my left. I know everybody's been hearing us talk about it. You're talking about a generation of people, not a select few out of their generation. You're talking about full generations that most willingly enlisted into the military and went off to war to defend us. Not all. You're talking about a time period when they were just told to go. They were pulled from their work, from school. They were just pulled and told that they needed to go. And they give us those rights. There's a poem I just take an excerpt from that says that it is the veteran, not the reporter, that gives us the freedom of speech. The freedoms that is given to you is from these men right here. When the recruiters call and you're trying to graduate and you have all these plans for college and you just try to brush off the recruiter, it is the rights that these men have given us to say no to that recruiter and to go to college and to do what we do. So I want to thank you all very much for that, because a lot of people take that stuff for granted, and that is why they are the greatest generation. A lot of them did not have that choice that we have to either join or not to join. So I just thank you very much. Yeah. I'm going to start off by saying also, because for Wycliffe, I grew up in Ballard. I also lived in Wycliffe. My junior and senior year, I went to Heath. That's where I graduated from. Currently attending this college here. I am also, a word I don't like, but I'm going to explain. I am also retired, and I'll explain that here shortly. Not a word I like. Retired means you're done. You can count on one hand and still have 5 fingers left over veterans that would greatly go by. I like to call it on standby. You know, you're not retired, you're on standby. Because in a moment's notice, they're there, standing, waiting, ready to defend this country if need be. You said they try to scare the American people. I think over the years, the Marine Corps has been around. We just celebrated our 234th birthday yesterday, the Marine Corps has. And we have showed that we're not a scared nation. We're there, we are ready to stand, we are ready to do what needs to be done. And we're on standby. It's not a retired thing. I got medically retired January 30th of last year for injuries taken in Iraq. I was toured over there. My Humvee took an IED, an improvised explosive device, and it took out my knees and had my knees. They told me I was combat ineffective. They told me if I could pass the physical fitness test that I could stay in. Standing long periods of time and running and stuff causes my knees to swell up. And it was just, I could no longer perform my duties. So that explains that. Going in, I served on a security detachment on the Marine Expeditionary Unit. MEU is what we call them. When you hear that Marines can be anywhere in the world in 24 hours, that's the MEU. We're on naval ships placed in different seas and different waters, and it can go in if we're called upon at any moment. We was actually sent in, was not supposed to go to Iraq, but we pushed to go in there. We was told to go. My convoy was the first convoy to go in. They put us just on the border of Kuwait and Iraq. And I remember sitting there in this little, base that we had made up, and they had some food, and they had a little place where you could watch some TV while we were eating. And I remember watching Fox News, and it had my unit was up there, the 22nd MEU, undecided whether or not to go. I'm like, no crap. I'd been sitting there for 3 days, and we hadn't done nothing. So I'm reading on the news that what I'm doing, and I'm like, yep, that's me. Now, Mom knows what I'm doing. We ended up going in, and being on security team, we provided security for convoys going in, supplying ammunition and stuff like that. We provided security for them so they could go around and get there safely. One of my most fun missions, I can say, is guarding the Muffin Man. We gave him that call sign. He carried muffins and food to the soldiers, and we just thought it was funny. This guy's out there risking his life to give our soldiers muffins, and so we gave him that name. It was pretty good times. I want to say that I lost 3 friends on Super Bowl Sunday. A lot of people do celebrations. Super Bowl Sunday is a time of mourning for me, and I'm very saddened because it was an explosion that could have been prevented. My job was to go out ahead. I was the lead truck, and we were to find explosives. We were heading in one direction, and it was not seen. My convoy made it through safely. We completely crossed it. We passed another convoy coming towards us that ended up hitting this IED that was in the road coming back the other way. So Super Bowl Sunday is kind of a down day for me. It's not a very happy time. What we do is great as a nation. We stand before people and show that generations are here. I hear all the time about hooligans and kids nowadays, and the overall pictures of kids nowadays is going to these colleges. I look around, and as a corporal, I had 16, 17-year-old kids that would come up to me, ready to join, like, I'd love to join, hey, go talk to your recruiter. They're there. They're ready. So you can't call them hooligans in this young nation, because there are men that want to stand, and they're not ready yet. So I think that's really great. But I just want to say, thank you to the veterans that stood before me, and they opened up the passageway that I could stand and do my duties. And they trained me. I trained a newer generation, and live on from there. So thank you very much.
This exemplifies the fact that we in the United States stand in a long and unbroken line of patriots that have fought for this country since before there was a country, and it passes from one generation to the next to secure the rights and freedoms that we all enjoy, to include the freedom to disagree. So it's an awesome thing. I've traveled greatly around the world, served with other military forces in the world, and while I've served with other forces that have high unit morale, I've yet to see another military force that has the same esprit de corps and same pride in their unit, their country, and their people as in the United States. And these gentlemen exemplify why. Now, there was a lady that was going to be here, Rebecca Abel. Her car broke down. She's an Army veteran, two tours of duty in Iraq. So Clausewitz called that the friction of war, the stuff that happens you don't anticipate. So if her vehicle hadn't broken down, she would have been here. If you have not signed in, please do so. There's a sign-in sheet up there, and especially for some of the students that are here for extra credit, that's especially important. Also up here, there is a commemorative wall for veterans if you have anything that you'd like to post there. So after the playing of taps, the veterans will be around if you'd like to talk to them. Also, there's refreshments. Sir?
Oh, and the books are for sale up here.
This is Michael Swinford of the Veteran Voice. We want to thank you for being with us today, and I'm sure these men's stories touched your heart because we understand what freedom is today and the price that was paid for it. So we'll see you next time on the Veteran Voice. So long.